You know, ghosts have always been a thing with me since I was a little kid, you know? Very scared little kid. Going to people's houses, I'd visit them, and then I'd be like, it's time to leave now. I never slept over anybody's house because I was very scared of things. And just, you know, it was on my mind, and I thought it was a very universal subject also. I go to India or Japan or wherever, and everybody has ghost stories, you know? Don't go in that house. It's haunted. And I wanted to tell a story about that. The first draft of Sixth Sense turned out to be everything that I was fearing. Just the most, you know, derivative, you know, thing you'd ever read, with cliched lines and cheesy one-liners and familiar arcs, and everything was, you know, the fear just came right out of me going, you can't write those, see, this is garbage, you know? And I threw that one out, didn't look at it again, wrote another draft from page 1, did that one, that was garbage, and I was like, you know, there's gotta be something in here, you know, a line or something that works. There was nothing. There was nothing that I kept. Threw that one out. Started again. Somewhere in the third or fourth draft, the idea came to me of a hyper-compassionate child that this is happening to, you know, and that's why he was chosen to have this gift to see ghosts.
Do you ever feel the prickly things on the back of your neck?
Ironically, the first great lines that I wrote for that character aren't in the movie and weren't in the final draft, but they started me realizing who Cole was as a character. Action, Haley. There came, oh wow, now I got one scene that's original in this redundant, derivative movie. And I was like, no matter what, if I work as hard as I can, this is just gonna be a good movie. What can I do to put it over the top? And then I just sat there and got the idea for the ending. That changed everything. Basically, it was a feeling like you can't lose, you know? Because you got Michael Jordan waiting there if you need him to sink the last basket. Can't lose. And so you suddenly, everything I wrote was stronger than it had ever been. And I was writing, you know, as if I was Cole and as if I was Malcolm Crowe. And all these things were starting to build because I was just so excited about the idea. I felt like I had an ace in the hole, you know, this ending. And it just strengthened everything. Suddenly I was writing characters like I'd never written them, and storylines were emerging, and suspense was emerging. And before I turned around and looked at it, realized that, you know, I had made a personal film of a fictional story, and it was the first time I did it. And when I realized I did it, I was like, okay, now let's go and sell this thing. That was already much better.
I did that on the last take.
No, you didn't.
Yes,
You did a real casual.
Let's go to
Chris
the videotape.
No.
I read it in one night. I read it, you know, very quickly, and agreed to do it very quickly. I was as surprised by the ending in the script, I think, as the audience was in the theater. I was completely unprepared for that ending.
Look away this way.
Once I knew the ending of the film and that my character was indeed dead, I had to forget about it and act as if I weren't. Never really thought about acting as a ghost.
If you could change something in your life, anything at all, what would it be? Mm-hmm. You don't have to answer me now.
Each movie has its own theme, and Sixth Sense's theme was communication, you know, and that's just for me, you know, to kind of tie all the characters together so that it feels a part of one journey, you know, that the mother's trying to talk to the son, you know, the husband, Malcolm's trying to talk to his wife, and all these ghosts are trying to talk to Cole, you know, and that everyone learning to communicate is kind of the point of the movie. Did I give you the right expression?
The second audition was the first time we had a real long conversation. I got in there, and I guess the nerves went away because I just got into talking about the character with them and talking about how much, you know, how Cole really feels for the people he sees, and how the film was about communication. It wasn't just about ghosts.
Put the camera on, Kyle. One last rehearsal. Okay, rehearsal's up. Last time for everybody to make mistakes.
He's a rare individual in Hollywood because most films come from modern fiction, modern novels, remakes of old films, remakes of TV shows from the 60s. And Knight just makes these stories up out of his head. He's a great storyteller. He thinks in big pictures. I mean, although he does think about individual shots, he thinks about telling the story with the camera.
Like here, Olivia?
How about
How's that, Kyle?
yeah.
At a very early point in the film, it became very much less about a child psychologist as it was about a man searching for some answer. Even though the answer was in the room with him, it was like he was stumbling about in the dark trying to find the door.
You're pretty quiet in school, but you're very intelligent. You've never really been in any bad trouble.
I wrote Malcolm with very little dialogue for obvious reasons, you know. His eyes become our narration. And so when the kid says something about drawings and that he draws people, and he drew a guy with a screwdriver in his neck, his reaction and all of that stuff is so important, you know, to see the arc of non-believer to believer in his eyes.
How do you draw now?
Draw people smiling, dogs running, rainbows.
I never really thought of my character as being irredeemable or in need of redemption.
Are you a good doctor?
Well, I used to be.
He's quoted as being a brilliant psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, child psychologist.
Stack of scripts that I had to read on a flight, and that was the first one I grabbed.
Vincent Gray is a very troubled kid, and he does something very violent, and he looks very scary. But deep down, Donnie's, you know, a very, very sweet, caring person, and so I said, wow, that would be very interesting to see that person at the lowest point. You know, it would hurt us to see that, and it would hurt Malcolm to see that. Prior to the shooting, it would hurt him, you know? And Donnie, basically, he was at a place in his life where he was ready to commit, you know, 1,000% to this 5-minute scene that he had in this movie. I don't know how many people would have committed the way he did. This is for 5 minutes of screen time. This dude was like, you know, really messed up. The whole vibe of the set changed. You know, we were making movies until he walked onto the set.
A character like Vincent, I mean, how could you really relate to him? He's just been tortured his whole life. You know, he's been hiding his whole life. He's been in pain his whole life and not had anyone to help him. He was told that he had. The one thing I did know is I had to somehow suffer. I had to come away from the comforts that I was used to having.
Wow, you look a lot different than you did in the movie.
Yeah, I'm eating again. A lot of people make a big deal about the weight loss, you know, because I physically sort of transformed, and that almost came by mistake. After, you know, the first 2 weeks of sort of dieting and stuff, I had lost about, you know, 15 pounds, and I realized I still had 3 weeks to go before shooting, so I kept going. Then it became sort of, you know, unhealthy, because then it became 20 pounds, and then it became 25 pounds. But I started to sort of go through a lot of emotional changes, and I started to really be alone. I remember one night I went down now to Philadelphia, and it was just a few days away from shooting, and a friend of mine came to visit. We went out into the park, and he said, look, he said, you want to, you know, go over your stuff or anything? And I said, yeah, we can go through it. And he said, well, why don't you be Vincent, and I'll be like Vincent's friend? And we started, you know, to sort of just improvise, walking through the park, and it was real late at night. And he started talking to me, and I instantly knew that Vincent doesn't have any friends. And I didn't, you know, Vincent probably wouldn't be able to tell if this guy was a ghost or a real person. So I just took off. And I hid in some bushes in the park. And I ended up staying there, you know, well into like the early morning. And then I just decided to walk around a little while. You know, I just decided to stay out and just try to exist, you know, in the state that I was in. And it was hard. It was really hard. And I couldn't go into the hotel and just order room service. You know, I just couldn't do that. I couldn't allow myself to do that, because it just would have been robbing, you know, myself of something I needed to experience to do this part properly. Tried rebelling, and he tried, you know, probably wearing dark makeup and every outlet he could have to get away from the pain and the fear that he was feeling, and he was ready to end it. And so why bury him in clothes and give off some impression that he's a rebellious kid or whatever, because he wasn't. He was a tortured kid.
That's really good.
Knight came over, and Bruce said, Donnie, you know, tell him your idea, tell him your idea. And I told him, and Knight thought it was a great idea.
Okay, hit it. On action, Donnie, you say, did you get him drunk?
The underwear was sort of the compromise. You know, when it was time to shoot the scene, they recommended I put on some pants, and I just didn't want to. So we settled on tighty whities, and you know, they stained them up real good and made them look really weathered.
Action.
You know why you're afraid when you're alone?
When they said rolling, I just was a nervous wreck. I was shaking like a leaf. I wanted to do good. I wanted to not ruin the film, you know, but I wanted to do what I set out to do, you know, which is be true to this character and to let everyone in that room feel a bit of what I was feeling, which was only a bit of what he was feeling.
He and Vincent are a lot alike, but I guess Cole maybe might be a little stronger. And though he feels for the people that he sees, I think that's the one thing that keeps him from completely falling apart.
What's amazing about Haley is I talked to him as an actor, not as a child actor. And that was irrelevant that he was young, you know, just directly as another actor. In the best way, an inspired actor, which is, you know, the greatest thing you hope for. And the one thing we did with Cole, which I learned a lot of lessons from my previous movie, which was Wide Awake, which also starred another 10-year-old, was showing a child sad is basically to empty all the reserves that the audience has. If they have any, whatever that amount is that they have of, you know, we'll go with you and we're going to give as much as we can emotionally before we get back, it empties it entirely. When you see a child, you know, sad on screen, it's like, okay, it's all gone, and now what? You better have something good now because I got nothing left and I got no patience left. And that's something I learned, you know, the hard way. And so Haley and I sat down at the beginning of the movie and I said, you can't ever be sad in this movie, okay? And so you can express it, you can express emotions as fear, you can express anger. I want you to be a fighter. I don't want you to mope at all. I want you to fight this with every fiber of your being, your existence, you know? But he's fighting it, you know, you never go out there. You never, I told you never to go out there, you know what I mean? Talking to him, he's the only one who can help himself. He feels alone. And that, we fade on that kid.
Haley Joel came in completely prepared to, you know, play this part. And when I was working with him as an actor, as one actor to another, I found him very compelling to watch. Not too long after we started filming, I realized that would be an interesting thing to just use, to just watch him and be fascinated by him, because I was fascinated by this 11-year-old boy who has this incredible acting talent, and just how weird it is to see that in a young man, in a young you know, boy, to see this guy acting and crying on cue, on take 16, cried at the same spot every time.
Okay, here we go. Marker.
And action.
He was two things on that film. He was a little boy, a little 11-year-old boy, and when they said action, he was an 11-year-old man-child who was capable of a really broad range of emotions and a real lightness, a real light touch in his performance that is really rare in all actors and incredibly rare in child actors.
Ready? Let's do it.
Okay.
When you guys walk in,
He's very much a kid. When he's with other kids, he does play and he's normal, whatever that is. But he's very abnormal too because he's brilliant. And it kind of makes sense because kids are less self-conscious. But to have his understanding is crazy. He's one of a kind. They broke the mold after Haley.
When he discussed the character, it wasn't a kid who sees dead people. It's a sensitive kid. This is a movie about communication. Oh, and he also sees dead people. Not up yet, and he's already experiencing these things, so he's lost a lot of that innocence.
I'd never really read anything as whole as this story. It's just so complete, and everything that happens is completely justified. Nothing is gratuitous. The characters are completely whole. Their journeys are quite unusual and yet very identifiable. I really seemed to understand what Lynn was about without having to kind of register a lot. It was more of a visceral kind of reaction and quite immediate. But it was just the tone of the whole thing. It was like jumping in a really beautiful river and just swimming with it, you know?
Tony is great. I mean, it wasn't hard at all to to pretend that she was, you know, my mother in the film. And it's really hard for Cole to keep the secret from her. And even though he really loves her, and even though that's really the only person before Malcolm that he can trust.
Control freak in that way, you know. So when he turns around and kind of throws her world in her face and it becomes complete confusion, I think it takes somebody kind of trusting and brave to be able to go through that change into something else and to learn from somebody whom you think you've been teaching.
It was a sweet conversation that she heard, and a funny answer. That scene where they play that game, the step forward, step back game, I kept sucking the camera back on every mistake that Bruce made, you know, to accent Bruce's feeling that this kid's slipping away from him. Bruce kept just shifting in his seat, and it was a real gentle physical acting moment that was wonderful to see a big action hero, you know, sitting in a chair and just, you know, he's trying to get again comfortable again to, okay, so let's do this again. The next question, you know, he's losing the kid. And, you know, just those subtle shifts, it's so unfamiliar to us to see Bruce Willis do that, and he did it so wonderfully. It made us so connected to him. Cut.
Night.
Yeah, what's up?
I work on little things like that, on things of trying to say a great deal with as little, I guess, effort as possible, as little seeing the acting. You know, I don't want you to see the acting. I just want you to see the behavior.
I don't just, you know, your own opinion. Why do I look at my pants hiked way up?
Okay.
Hey, camera marker.
That's the right answer.
You know, the first thing I told Bruce was, I need to see you vulnerable in this movie, you know, because you have such an air, he has such an air about him of, no matter what happens, he'll figure it out. And I wanted to see him hurt and vulnerable. And it's something we worked on, and he's, I mean, just given such poignant performance in the role. It's wonderful to see that side. He was giving his kind of wedding speech to his wife, and the way he broke down during the speech, giving the speech in front of this crowd, the place was like chilled.
I never thought that I could stand up here in front of my friends and my family. You know that. And tell you what's inside of me. But I can today.
I think he's done definitely some of his best work, if not his best work. I'm so proud to have him in the movie. It's just, you know, you get all that electricity of having him, because he's a superstar, and he walks in the room, you know, he's a superstar. You get all that, and you get the real human being inside him for like the first time ever. You get a glimpse of what he's like.
It was nice to be able to play a gentle character. I'd done a couple films that were ungentle, or not about, you know, being an introspective character. And I've done probably more of those than I have films where I play introspective characters. So it was a nice change of pace.
He was wonderful, and I feel very lucky that I got an actor who was as good as he was to have play Malcolm, because it brought a lot of new things to the scene that wouldn't have been there had it not been for Bruce.
Films that have surprise endings are somebody always gives it away. Whether it's a film critic or, you know, your friend says, "Oh, this is what happens in this film. Well, go see it anyway." No one gave it away, which is a kind of phenomena in itself.
We showed it to 1,000 people before before Sixth Sense was, you know, known or anything, and it was 1,000 people that came back had no idea, blown away, collective gasp of 1,000 people. That was the perfect scenario, because they had no idea there was a twist ending. They had no idea to look for it, nothing. The place was stunned at the end. I think the studio might have thought they had a bomb, because it was absolute silence. No clapping, no nothing. Credits started rolling, and there was just, you know, this feeling of overwhelmed. They were overwhelmed by what they just saw, and I was like, yeah. No, and the studio was like, oh no. It was fun. It was a fun time.
Can you tell me what's exciting about tonight?
Oh, well, you know, bringing my job and my home together is a really great thing, and bringing Bruce here was a cool thing. You know, we're both East Coast boys, so it's fun. Sixth Sense happened to me when I was 27, and now I'm 30, and I now know what it's like to make something that became more than a movie. And so now hit movies don't mean anything to me. You know, I need to make another experience that is more than a movie, and that's all I set out to do every time now. If I make 10 hit movies in a row, it doesn't matter. That's all because of Sixth Sense. Most people say you can't consciously go make an experience like that it just happens, you know? And hopefully it happened because I was seeing something, smelling something, you know, and hopefully it'll happen again.